One of my fellow master gardeners, Roseanne Jones, has graciously agreed to sit in tonight and make sure that I don't say anything wrong. So I appreciate that. So the Fairfax County Master Gardener Association is under the auspices of the Fairfax County Office of the Virginia Cooperative Extension. And in turn, that office is overseen by the state land grant university cooperative extension offices of the Virginia Tech and Virginia State Universities. And our goal again is to, tonight is to talk about environmentally responsible lawn care so that we maximize the goodness of lawns and minimize or eliminate risks. And I know that we all want to do the right thing, but we oftentimes get confused as to what that is. Today, it's not easy. We get bombarded with commercials to buy this, buy that, do this, but not that. They come on TV at the wrong time of the year. And so it's no wonder that a lot of people don't do the right thing with regard to their lawns and spend far too much money or too much time and don't get the results that they may want, or more importantly, do things that aren't environmentally responsible. So again, we can all strive to have perfect lawns, but oftentimes the good enough lawn suffices as a responsibly maintained lawn. And of course, another factor is also in these efforts, how much time and money are we willing to put into this effort? So tonight I'm going to talk about the topics that you see right here. So my goal is to be as comprehensive as I can, but not as detailed as I want to be. So I ask your pardon in that regard. And that's only because there is so much time I want to take up this evening. And I'll emphasize, my goal is to emphasize things like important things like fertilizing and soil testing, and not spend too much time on weeds and other products, as interesting as they may be. And to be sure, I'd be happy to do another presentation on weeds if the interest is there at some point. And also, please note that the PDF handout that your association kindly sent to you has an extensive listing of websites, studies, some podcasts, and videos that you can view at your leisure that will expand further on what I'm talking about. And so I'll apologize in advance if some of the information on soils and fertilizers is going to be a little boring to listen to at the end of a long workday at the beginning of the week. And given that there might be some Baltimore Ravens fans with some other interest tonight, but I sense that if this audience was willing to set aside some time to show up for this presentation, then you'll appreciate what we have to pass on. So the first thing, of course, is one of the major objectives of sound lawn maintenance is to protect our water. And by definition, a watershed can be a large or small area, but in any way, it's a land area that channels rainfall and snow melt to creeks, streams, rivers, and eventually to outflow points such as reservoirs, our own Chesapeake Bay, and the ocean. And the Chesapeake Bay Watershed that you see right here in the center of the screen is a vast collection of such bodies of water from 5 different states and the District of Columbia. And Fairfax County itself has 30 designated watersheds, and those are illustrated in that little colored map on the left. And geographically, the closest to Great Falls are Difficult Run and Pond Branch. I'm sure that those are names that are familiar to the audience. Excuse me. And one thing to keep in mind, though, with the responsibility for keeping an eye on water and looking out for it, always remember, most of us are within 10 to 15 minutes of a body of water, whether it be a stream or an outflow of some sort. So we all have a role to play in this. I want to talk a little bit about resource protection areas, also related to water. The Commonwealth of Virginia has established resource protection areas, or RPAs, to help us maintain healthy waterways. The RPA consists of perennial streams, tidal shores, wetlands, or certain non-tidal wetlands that are in and of themselves, and a required 100-foot buffer contiguous to those bodies. There's also on the screen something called a resource management area, and that's a further 500-foot extension landward of the RPA. And the regulations differ in that in a RPA, we are not supposed to put down any kind of fertilizer at all that could find its way into that body of water. I say fertilizer, but that also means herbicides, insecticides, or other products that we don't want to get into our waterways. So that's a strict 100-foot area. The RMA is a little more lenient, but at the same time, within a resource management area itself, you want to do best practices because bad practices can find their way into compromising our water just as much as if we're not paying attention. So a lot of times people might want to know, maybe they don't want to know in some cases, am I living in a resource protection area? Is my yard a resource protection area? And you can find out readily by going to the site that I see up here, that is listed here, to get all of that information. And you can also you can refer to an inter-county map that's part of the QR code here. That's also on the handout that I gave. That will take you to a map that will allow you to plug in your address and drill your way down to your property to see whether or not you actually are close to an RPA. So in the in the illustration here on the left, you can see that the better part of that one property, number 33, I think it's designated, most of it is an RPA. And so what does that mean? Well, that has implications, and that means that owner should not be putting down all of those products that we talked about, given that 100-foot area. So this map apparently does list these RPAs up to that 100-foot area, and everything further on, of course, an RMA. So we're talking about lawn service companies. One question you may want to consider when you're looking to engage a lawn service company, do you know what an RPA is? And if they don't, you can educate them, since you now know, or you can also choose to maybe look at other companies. So something to keep in mind. That's a foot stomper. I want to quickly also point out that we have two different types of lawn turf in our area. We have cool season grasses and warm season grasses. And if you look at the illustration here, first of all, the cool season grasses, which are bluegrasses, fescues, ryegrasses, are what 95% of us have. And these are grasses that have two spurts of growth, one in the springtime, where you see both extensive root and shoot growth, and a slowdown in the summer, depending on how hot it is or whether there's how bad a drought is. And then a resurgence in the fall before going into semi-dormancy for the winter time. So your cool season grasses will, they'll grow very well at different times of the year. I often say that when you're coming out of May and you have a cool season lawn, that's the best it's going to look all year. So it's just downhill from there till next year. Warm season grasses, however, grow a little differently. These thrive in summer stress, summer heat stress, and these are your zoysia and Bermuda. The other distinction is that Well, to maybe ask, how are these grasses, why do we call them cool season? Why do we call them warm season? Cool season grasses actually thrive in temperatures between 60 and 75 degrees. And most of our summer days are not 60 and 75 degrees. But those who have zoysia, or now more and more Bermuda lawns are starting to take place, their natural growing temperatures are 80 to 95 degrees. So if you know anybody in your neighborhood who has a zoysia lawn, it's beautiful this time of year. So sticking with this, we are located in what's called a transition zone for growth, especially for turf. So you'll note that it's divided, this map of the US is divided into cool season climate, which is more friendly to a cool season lawns such as Kentucky blue or fescue or ryegrasses. And then you have warm season grasses such as St. Augustine, Bermuda, zoysia, centipede. Then you have the transition zone. And in the transition zone, you can grow both warm and cool season grasses, but neither of them very well, neither of them all year long. So it's a choice of one versus the other. And one thing I would point out, and I don't think it's any surprise to anyone, but this transition zone is probably going to be inching upwards as over the next several years if climate trends continue. So chances are that southern North Carolina might be more receptive to all of those warm season grasses, and southern Pennsylvania might see themselves part of a transition zone. So this is important because of when we come into fertilization. So one of the things that is drilled into master gardeners, and you'll hear master gardeners say again and again, is to start off any effort at growing anything by getting a soil test. And a soil test is going to tell you that, well, first of all, the nutrients in your soil are needed to support healthy and healthy lawns, healthy plants. But unless that soil is properly in the right pH range, those nutrients are going to be locked up. And so in such cases, you could be putting fertilizer on your soil and it's not doing anything. It's just staying there. But if your pH is too low or too high, there are ways to mitigate that, and it's by the use of lime. And if the soil is too acidic, if the pH is too low, and if it's on the opposite end of the spectrum, alkaline, then aluminum sulfate or iron sulfate can also be used to bring it down to the right level. So a little bit more about the pH. And I know this is a little boring, but let's just look at it because I think it's important to understand the importance of the soil test. First of all, pH stands for potential or power of hydrogen. So as we said before, plants need macronutrients and another class of nutrients called micronutrients, and they're listed on the right side of that chart, that colored chart. So, and you see corresponding bars that show that when a pH is extensively acidic or extensively alkaline, those bars are not going to be at their fullest. So we do know this for grass and most plants, by the way, to do well, you want to get your soil pH to be where the bars, in fact, are the widest. And that happens to be in a range of 6.2 to 6.8. First of all, I hope everybody's familiar with the soil pH scale. This actually is a scale that ranges from 1.0 of highly acidic to 14.0, which is highly alkaline, with 7.0 being neutral. So again, it's just left of neutral or slightly acidic that we want our soil to be in. So why do we want that? Once again, it's because we don't want those nutrients in the soil to be locked up. We want them to do what nature intends them to do, and that is to grow our plants, in this case, grass. So here's another illustration. So to further explain this pH business, think of it as the balance of positive hydrogen ions in the soil and negative hydroxide ions. So we get to the ideal point where the positive ions slightly outnumber the hydroxide ions. And so think of that again, as we just mentioned, being slightly acid. And that's that 6.2 to 6.8 or 7.0 range. So if the pH tests come out somewhere below that range, it can be brought up to that range by applying lime. But you don't just willy-nilly scatter the lime on. You have to measure. First of all, you have to find out what the pH is. So if your soil came back and you had a pH, let's say, of 5.5, it might tell you that you need to apply 100 pounds of lime per 1,000 square feet. So let's think about that for a minute. The other rule is you can only apply 50 pounds of lime per 1,000 square feet at any one time. So what you would have to do in that case, and the soil test would spell this out, is to apply an initial dose of 50 pounds per 1,000 square feet, and then another 50 pounds or whatever that balance is to obtain the full amount of lime that's going to correct the soil. Now, one other thing, everybody's lawn isn't exactly 1,000 square feet. So that means that through various means, we're going to have to measure the square footage and interpolate what the amount of lime is that we're going to need to put down. Okay. So this could be a little, mathematically challenging, but it's really not that hard. There is, there are satellite programs that you can pull up your property. You pull up an image of your property and kind of trace the boundary and get a good idea of the square footage of your lawn. But again, that's important to do that. So here again, something you'd want to ask your lawn care service. What about lime? You say you're going to put lime down. Well, are you going to put it down before you do a soil test? And they might say, yeah, you need it. Well, how do you know without a soil test? I've seen that firsthand. On my morning walk one day, I was talking to some folks that were measuring a lawn. I thought, wow, that's great. What are you guys doing? Well, we're going to put down lime. Oh, did you have a soil test? No, they're never reliable, and we don't believe in them. All lawns need lime. So, okay, there it is. So, a question to be asked. If you say I need lime, what are you basing that on? And yeah, they might say, well, soils in this area trend toward acidic because of higher rainfall. I'll give them that, but again, do you know how much they're putting on, and is it the right amount? Okay. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I want to talk about some of these other best practices that you see on this slide. So we'll begin with fertilizing. So how fertilizers work. I think we all know this, but all fertilizers, standard bag of fertilizer will have 3 numbers. They'll depict the quantity or the percent in that the contents of that bag that are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is for the shoot and root growth. It gives you the green color and steady growth. And it's and it's important for maintaining that initial lawn health. As we'll see later, there are some constraints about when you want to put this down and how much you want to put down. And there, like lime, there is a rate that you will need to put down, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Phosphorus is essential to good root development and found mainly in starter fertilizers to help new lawns. All maintenance lawn fertilizers contain 0 phosphorus. So if you were to buy a bag of maintenance fertilizer, it might have a notional number of 2005 or something. And so that's for established lawns. And it's the law that no fertilizer for established lawns is sold as a maintenance fertilizer is sold with phosphorus. Here's the exception. If you are starting a new lawn or overseeding, you are allowed to buy starter fertilizer in Virginia, which does contain phosphorus. And you will use it on a one-time basis at the time of overseeding. And afterwards, you defer to a maintenance fertilizer, but that is the only time on a lawn that you're going to apply phosphorus. So when you know that when you go to a garden center or to or a box store, because you'll see varieties all on the shelf, and so that'll give you a general idea of better, how better to make your responsible choice. And potassium, of course, is that regulates the physiological processes, the sugar, just the benefit, just the overall plant. It helps keep it strong and generally healthy. So we talked about fertilizers in general. Now let's just drill down to the nitrogen component. This is important. There are 2 types of nitrogen that are contained in fertilizers. The first is a water-soluble nitrogen, and then water-insoluble. Well, what's the difference? Water-soluble means that when you put it down and you put water, you apply water, whether it's sprinkling or rainfall, that nitrogen is going to work itself right into the soil. It's a fast release. It's a fast release product. Water insoluble nitrogen, however, is a slow release because it's coated, whether it's with sulfur or some other material, so that as that coating wears away, the nitrogen is going to be applied at a much slower rate. So I've listed some advantages and disadvantages. So water soluble is normally cheaper. It's quick release, provides nitrogen when soils are cold. I didn't think that was a big important factor, but that's what it said. Water insoluble nitrogen, though, gives you a much more uniform growth. It's not likely to burn the grass, and it's not going to leach, and it's going to feed for a longer, more measured period. Now, the disadvantages are kind of the opposite of the advantages for both. They're corollaries, and you can see them there. But I want to talk also about how to read what's on a fertilizer bag, because you're going to see those 3 numbers, as I said, but you're also going to see total nitrogen as a certain amount. In this case, the notional amount is 16%. And then it might specify that a certain percentage of that 16% is water insoluble nitrogen. And this is important because of the application rate that you want to be sure gets adhered to. The fast release water soluble nitrogen is released at 0.7 pound per 1,000 square feet. The water insoluble nitrogen that can be released at a little higher quantity. So not 0.9 or 1 pound or so, 1.5 pounds. And it's important because this is the law, and people that are providing your fertilizer need to know this, and they need to, and that's the rate they need to be applying this stuff. And, you know, so that's on them to figure it out and make sure that they're responsible. Now, to be sure, when I talked to the Virginia Turfgrass Council, who works very closely with Chesapeake Bay Water Commission, I was, because I inquired about these rates just to be sure, and I was told that these rates are state law, and nearly everybody who applies fertilizer to turf grass as part of their job has to adhere to them. So persons who apply fertilizer to their own property are usually exempt from these regulations, but remember, we want to do the right thing. So we want to be sure that we kind of adhere to the less is better. So this is an important distinction, and I think it's worthy of asking your lawn care company about before signing an agreement. Next one. So the other thing is, now we want to talk about watering. I put up two different images here, because you are going to water the established lawn a little different than a newly seeded lawn. With an established lawn, the general rule is that deep watering, maybe at an inch per week, is what a lawn would take to stay happy. An inch per week, I don't see it happening all the time. I remember that includes rainfall, but in the throes of a very hot summer drought, then that's when you probably want to really kind of adhere to that inch per week rate. And again, you want to water in frequently, once or twice a week, not, you know, every day, every morning for 10 minutes, and then you're going to get your inch per week. That's not the way this works in this case. The best time for watering for watering an established lawn is early in the morning, and midday watering, I guess, is second best, but just remember there's going to be evaporation, so you're going to be potentially wasting water then. And I would say you don't want to water at night. Don't, because if you were to turn your sprinkler on about now, it's not going to see daylight until, or warmth until 7, 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. And that waterlogged soil can promote diseases, along with over-fertilization, which we'll talk about, and that could be a cause. Now, that's for established lawns, 1 inch once a week. But let's say you want to put down a newly seeded lawn. So we have to then do kind of the opposite. We want to keep that surface moist to enhance the germination of that new seed. So this is going to mean daily watering, and it might mean watering several times a day, depending on the temperature. Now, this week we're into a little bit of a hot spell. So if someone overseeded today or tomorrow, they would definitely want to be out there helping that seed along, because it's fighting that summer stress and won't go anywhere until it gets some moisture. So again, 2 different ways of doing it. Most of us with established lawns, remember, infrequently, 1 inch a week, newly seeded, keep it moist until it gets started, and then we'll be good. So just another illustration about why you want to do this 1 inch a week. So if you did something like the far left block, the water's just not going to penetrate. It may evaporate before it ever gets to a good length in the soil, and therefore the roots are going to remain shallow because there's nothing there to seed. Half an inch a week, that's better. 1 inch a week, well, that's the solution. That's best. Is it always, and again, you're going to have to factor in things like temperature and evaporation and the like, but 1 inch is the school solution. And if you go to any of those references that are on that PDF handout, I think that's what you'll see. Don't do this. We've all seen it. If you have an automatic sprinkler, get somebody to recalibrate those heads or do it yourself, because in this day and age, when you see what's happening out west with water shortages everywhere, it's like, man, we don't need to be doing this. But yeah, we do see it. Okay, I want to talk about some mowing essentials. And these are mainly things to avoid, to watch out for. And these are also things that you're also going to keep in mind and jot some notes about how your lawn service approaches some of what we're talking about here. So the first thing is you have to use a sharp blade, because a dull blade is going to shred your grass, and it won't look cleanly cut as you'll get with a sharp blade. Now, when we say sharp blade, it doesn't have to be razor sharp, but butter knife sharp is probably the standard of what you want. Notice those 4 grass blades on the left of that image. They seem to be haggard and tired, and it looks like they were shredded. And they can sometimes, they're going to not look good. They are also a potential entry point for fungal diseases, and so make sure we have that sharp blade. And if you do your own mowing and you've not sharpened the blade before, well, that should be done, honestly, at least 2 or 3 times a season. Yeah, that often. It can be done at home. You've got to take the blade off. You can hand file it or use machinery or a bench grinder. I know most people don't have a bench grinder in the garage, but there are also little tools that you can use as a chuck on a power drill that are able to, they're designed specifically for sharpening the blade, like a little stone. But the one thing, if you're doing it yourself, you have to be sure that the blade is balanced before reinstalling, because with those RPMs that engine is turning in that blade, it could wear out that engine if the blade is imbalanced over a long time. So let's say you don't want to do it yourself, but you realize the importance. One recommendation would be, and I'm not doing a cheap shill for Ace Hardware, but go to Ace. Most of their stores do offer blade sharpening services for a relatively decent price. I think it's $10. So, and they'll balance it too. Now for your lawn company, good question. What do you think we're going to ask them? How often do you sharpen your blades? You're coming onto my property with a mower that's normally running 6 hours, well, 6 hours, 6 lawns a day maybe or more, 5-6 days a week. When do you have time? Do you replace the blades? Do you sharpen them yourself? What are you doing? I'd be interested to know. I mean, I haven't asked anyone in particular, but I think the good ones do have, the good lawn services do have that covered, and they'll be happy to tell you that. The other thing is, we don't want to ever cut off more than 1/3 of the grass height. Now, I'm talking cool season lawns here. So there's what we call the 1/3 rule. And that's because we want to keep those clippings to a reasonable extent so that we don't get big clumps of grass and cause them to lie on the grass or have to bag them up. And that's more work. But you don't want to scalp the lawn neither, and because that could rapidly deteriorate the lawn. And so by cutting too low, you're also damaging the grass. I mean, you're stressing it out when it really doesn't need to be stressed out, especially in hot weather. And again, low growing grass has more susceptibility to drought and high temperatures and the like. And remember also, the corollary is that the higher the grass is mowed, and for cool season grass, let's say 3.5 inches is a good norm. Let's say 3 to 4. The better the root structure is going to be, because the roots are not growing in the summertime, and you don't want those grass blades to be susceptible to burn and food non-replenishment that those roots are not going to be providing. So in the summertime, the risk is low mowing. So you want to mow high generally. So that's 3.5 to 4 inches. Now, this person is not mowing high. I don't think he's having any fun either. It looks like he's leaving clumps all over the place, and he really ought to raise that blade. But what can I say? He's getting good aerobic exercise. It's like he's really leaning into it. And probably he's going to have to do some raking afterwards too, which is extra work. But he wouldn't have to do it if the lawn were mowed in a more responsible manner. So the other thing is, do we mulch, or do we bag, or do we just throw it out? So everyone will tell you today that mowing a lawn will keep it, mowing a lawn does what mowing a lawn does, but mulching it keeps it healthy. The mulch that you send back to your soil is going to provide nutrients and food and organic matter, both that's going to help the grass and the soil. And it's also going to save you time that you would have spent bagging and emptying that bag and carrying it somewhere and taking it to a landfill. And actually, speaking of landfill, let's say landfills, mulching grass blades is also good for the environment, because more and more landfills you read about are either charging for yard waste, grass, or and they don't want it. So hopefully, keep that grass mulched. It's called grasscaping. So keep that grass where it can do some good. And it's also going to provide you some, remember we talked about providing nitrogen. Well, that's free nitrogen, and it's going to break down very quickly, and it's good for the lawn. And in this image at the far right, I don't see that too much anymore. I think Fairfax County throughout has done away with plastic bags, but I took this picture on a walk several years ago, and that was quite common. It's always better to recycle, as we said, or if you want to keep it on your own property and compost it, and you can also use it in your own vegetable or ornamental gardens too, as a source of food. What about mowing when the grass is wet? So maybe the lawn company is going to come and it's early morning and there's dew on the grass, and I don't think you could tell them don't do it then, but if you have the choice, I would advise waiting until some of that dew might burn off. Definitely don't do it when it's in the rain, because wet blades, they're prone to get knocked over instead of clipped. And there's also a safety factor, obviously, with footing, and who, for that matter, wants to risk running a corded electrical mower in a wet environment. And so, and the other thing too is the strain on the engine. It's not mulching effectively. You're going to get more clumps and there, wheel ruts perhaps, and then there's that disease potential, those fungal diseases. And as you can see on the bottom of the deck, it all gets caked on there, and who knows what is being transported from one lawn to the next if this is a lawn company. So anyway, that's it. Try to avoid it when it's wet. So let's talk a little bit about lawn thatch. The lawn service might say, we'll dethatch your lawn. Well, I guess that's good, but maybe you don't need it. How to tell whether you do or don't? If the buildup is an inch or more, then you probably want to think about dethatching, and you can do it, yourself, or you can, have someone do it for you with a machine, or there are components if you have a riding lawnmower or so that you could attach that will also do it. So the problem with thatch is that if the layer gets too thick, water and air won't get, or other fertilizer will have trouble getting to the roots. So you'll say, Tony, you just told me a couple slides back that I'm supposed to compost or recycle my lawn clippings. Well, grass clippings don't contribute to thatch buildup. The thatch is basically dead stems, roots, stolons or rhizomes, which are above or underground roots between the green blades of grass and the soil surface. And if it's ½ inch or less, I would say let it go. The other thing you want to do is also you can consider tackling that simply by having your lawn aerated. And so that brings us to what is aeration? That's simply reducing the soil compaction or a heavy thatch layer by controlling the thatching lawns while helping water and fertilizer move into the root zone. A machine will pass over the lawn several times. It'll pull out little hollow plugs, hollow holes that you see right there. The plugs will be kept on the surface, leave them there, that's fine. But as you see in that center image, water and air and nutrients can now get to the soil, and once they do, you're going to have deeper roots, better watering, better fertilizer, just better liming if that's that time of the year that you're going to be doing it. So that goes hand in glove, I think, with the good fall replenishment effort. So you could do it in the springtime. I'm an advocate for doing it in the fall because that's when most lawn replenishment is done. That's when most overseeding is done. So if you were to aerate in conjunction with overseeding, that's a good formula. And if, as we say, as it's pointed out here, if you know that that's one exception where you want to probably mow a little lower the day before the aeration is scheduled, and maybe water the lawn so that it'll penetrate and pull out those plugs very well, and then the overseeding will occur. So one other item that's talked about is, that's often not talked about, is putting a top dressing on your lawn. And this is simply putting down a ½ inch of compost over the lawn or sections of the lawn just to give it more nutrients. And it's going to increase the soil matter and result in better soil structure. It's also going to be good for having better seed to soil contact if you do this in conjunction with overseeding. So I think the gold standard is if you're serious about a fall lawn replenishment, then you want to do the overseeding, of course, the aerating, and then the top dressing. And of course, remember what I said, starter fertilizer on a one-time basis. So just to illustrate very quickly, if you were doing an overseeding. So you would have already performed your soil test, but now you're going to aerate, you're going to overseed, top dress, and do that starter fertilizer, as we said. Next step, as we saw on several slides back, you want to water it daily and minimize foot traffic while you're promoting germination. This is probably for the next 2 to 3 weeks until the grass is comfortably germinated. Then after 30 days, when you do the first mowing, you could apply a maintenance type fertilizer, which would get it ready to go into winter dormancy, and that will then further enhance the springtime flush of growth. Optionally, you could also do a second maintenance fertilizer application after 60 days. It's not essential, but it depends on the type of fertilizer you use and you know, whether it's a slow release, fast release. So anyway, so that's kind of it, the 4-step process. I apologize for this is kind of an eye chart, and I apologize for the small print on here, but let me point out some of the important things. The top bar, where that brown bar is, that's a soil test. So this illustrates what a lawn calendar should reflect in the way of best practices. And leading off with that top bar is soil test. And that ought to be done every 2 to 3 years. When you find that the pH is going to need adjustment, you could then apply the lime any time of the year except when the ground is potentially frozen. So that would be December through February if we had a really cold winter. Top dress, of course, you could do it in the spring, you could do it in the fall. Core aeration, spring or fall, but again, I prefer fall myself. And fertilizing. Now that's for a cool season grass. You'll see 2 different shades of green there. That darker green is where we're at right now. This is prime fertilizer time. That's when you want to put your fertilizer down as opposed to spring. Now, should you put anything down in spring? We're told, be careful, go light in springtime, because despite what the commercials say on TV, heavy fertilization can set you up for some bad problems later on in the fall. And these can manifest themselves in various fungal diseases that result from excess top growth that occurs from fertilization in the spring. So our rule of thumb is to go at a half rate if you do want to put down fertilizer, nitrogen in the springtime. Water, mow, yeah, we do all that. As I said, I'm not going to talk too much about weed control tonight. That could be for another night. But there are times when you want to put a pre-emergent down for different kinds of weeds, as we'll see in a minute, and times when you don't want to put something down for a certain other kind of weed. So the point being that this is complex, and you just got to know it's a conscientious decision. Do you want to prevent crabgrass in the summertime? Well, you got to know when to put down a weed preventer. That's in early spring. What about your winter weeds? We all have those winter weeds, such as purple bittergrass, henbit, purple dead nettles, speedwell, and these are the first things that bloom on our lawn. Well, they're germinating now, so if you wanted to prevent them, now is when you would be putting down a seed or an inhibitor. The problem is, though, if you're putting down new seed on your lawn, which is now is the best time to be doing that, you have to make a choice. Are you going to live with those winter weeds that are going to germinate, or are you going to put down a preventer, which is also going to prevent your lawn seed from germinating? So I think we know what the answer is there in most cases. Now, if you're not overseeding, then you can go ahead used to prevent. And just going down a little further at the bottom, warm season grasses, remember, when is there a big growth? In the summertime. So you want to fertilize from April through August, which is definitely not what we want to do with cool season. So very quickly, there are different kinds of weeds. I'd be very happy to come back and spend an evening talking about various weeds. They're grassy, broadleaf. There are sedges, which are kind of their own category. There are grassy and broadleaf. There are annual, summer, and winter weeds. And there are perennial weeds, and you could get really confused as to what product ought to go down where, ought to go down when for what weed, because these weeds are not going to show up all at the same time. So it's going to be oftentimes a multifaceted process. So this kind of illustrates that, you know, your grassy annual weeds will be controlled with a pre-emergent sometime in springtime, whereas a perennial weed is going to be controlled with a first grassy weed will be controlled with post-emergence. And in broadleaf weeds, again, we have categories that are annual and perennial, and under annual, there are summer and winter. So my thought is a yard that has 20% weeds is an okay yard by me. In fact, some weeds are actually beneficial. Some weeds, such as clover, they provide also a source of nitrogen fixing from the air, plus they're food for certain wildlife. So a little bit about diseases. Again, most of these are fungal diseases, and they'll look like crazy little blotches and spots, and you won't know where they're coming from. But oftentimes they're rooted in over-fertilization in the springtime and mowing when wet or with a dull blade and undergoing all kinds of other stress. Now is the time of year that if you had these diseases is when you'd likely see them occurring. Fungicides are available, but they're not going to cure the disease. They can prevent it from spreading, but lawns will most often recover on their own. And if there is extensive damage, you can always scratch out the dead area and put some seed down, and it'll be fine. So let's talk about lawn services now. So going through this chart, we talked about these are some of the questions that you want to ask your lawn care company. And if you go on to that PDF that I said, there's a good handout from the University of Nebraska that has a little grid, a little check mark that you could consider. And that'll also prompt you some other questions that can be used when you're comparing companies that you're going to hire. But first, in most cases, lawn companies are going to provide various tiers of service. The mowing is the basic, mowing and edging. And then some will include the mowing plus fertilizing and weed prevention and aeration. And in all cases, you want to ask them again, all of the questions, you know, all of the points that we talked about. What are you going to be putting down on my lawn for fertilizer? What's the rate? You say you're going to put lime down. And how do you know what needs it? And what are you doing with weed prevention? Why are you putting that down? They have to be able to listen to your concerns. And they have to explain things in terms that you understand and that you're comfortable with. So again, various tiers. Some will also go into a more full-scale operation that includes shrubs or mulching. Research the company. You're hiring them, and they want to work and they want to work for you. So make your choices based on your observations and your research. What's their business philosophy? What associations do they belong to? Are they committed environmentally to doing the right thing for soundness? Or are they coming on site and putting fertilizer down and leaving it on your sidewalk and letting it be thrown out onto the road? And then having the embarrassment of sticking a little sign down saying lawn service by Lawns Are Great Company or whatever. And so I think that's, come on, if they're in that business, they ought to know that. Also, you know, you want them to look at your lawn on its own merits. Are the services going to be done at the proper time of the year during the proper growing cycle? And again, warm season versus cool season grasses, I think they'll understand that, but ask again, what products are you going to be putting down and how specifically do they work? And as for the personnel, they should be trained and licensed for pesticide application, and they should, you know, they ought to be aware of what they're doing. And oftentimes, and I've asked questions at random, and I've asked, what are you putting down? And it's like, oh, I don't know. It's like, this is what they told me to put down. I guess one thing we have to also keep in mind too, without being, we have to be sensitive to the fact that a lot of lawn companies are really struggling with today's labor situation. So, so I'm not saying that you have to compromise, but I guess do appreciate sometimes if someone may not be as responsive as you hoped for, just because there are business issues that they're dealing with today that have been unlike others in recent years. And lastly, I think you want to also be sure that the equipment that they're bringing onto your property is the right equipment. I saw one website where I guess what they tout is they're not going to bring in any big stand-on mower with the 50 or 60 inch deck, you know, that weighs so many pounds, or, you know, that's excess. But, you know, they'll hand mow, you know, with a regular size mower, and maybe that's what you want to stick to. And maybe that's, you know, maybe if you have a larger size lawn, maybe 5,000 square feet, maybe you want that other, you know, the other thing, especially if they're charging by the hour. And of course, I think we all know that it's important to be sure that contracts are understood in all of their detail. And so there's no misunderstanding as to what is being delivered, and that pricing system is fully comprehensible. So I would say, you know, in this day and age, we're hearing a lot of questioning about what do lawns really serve any nutritional purpose and environmentally enhanced purpose. And there are arguments at both ends of the spectrum, increasingly vocal at the anti-lawn end of the spectrum. And I think you just have to Google anti-lawn articles and you'll come up with the whole plethora. But we have to step back a minute and just understand that lawns do provide provide an environmental enhancement. And, you know, whether it be erosion control, filtration of dirt, noise suppression, even emotional and physical well-being and visual appeal. I mean, who doesn't like looking at a pleasantly tasteful lawn? Well, I shouldn't have phrased it that way. I'm sure some people don't. But again, appealing landscapes have positive impacts and effects on people. Of course, you know, we're not, there's turf grass is used extensively in our sports programs. We've all seen in recent years how artificial turf may not be the best for some of the hazards that it presents. So I think, you know, when you look at all these factors, the cooling effect, Stormwater management, that's an important one. Lawns aren't going to go away, but what we really have to do more than ever, I think, is properly maintain them. And only by doing that are any of the anti-lawn arguments going to be blunted and, you know, and maybe seen more as a whole than as a one-sided proposition. So we probably have seen, these are actual articles that I found, some very recent. And again, you could probably do about 100 times many if you were to look. But I don't doubt that any of the sentiment voiced here isn't well intended. But this is allowed to happen because lawns are not properly maintained. We do bad things with lawns. We over-fertilize, we overwater, we use products when we're not supposed to. We don't use them in the right amount. And that just gives grist to the anti-lawn sentiment. But at the same time, I'll also say this. There could be property areas in a residential property where a lawn may not be appropriate. And if you have extensive shade, then no amount of, lawns are going to need a minimum of 4 hours of sunlight a day to thrive. And if you don't have that, you may want to consider some alternatives, shrubs, perennials. There are ornamental grasses. There are no-mow grasses. Some of these pictures were taken in my own neighborhood, ornamental beds. One person even has a little mini meadow on one side of her driveway, which is not suitable for grass just because of the slope. And it looks very, very inviting when I walk by, and very pleasant to look at. And don't forget that vegetable gardens are also something that we shouldn't disregard. So a little 4x4 vegetable garden that gives us a tomato plant and some string beans and a pepper plant, that's a good thing. So alternatives to lawns for the right reason are a good thing. Well, I want to also point out one other thing before I drop off for the, let me go back. I happen to be, this week there is an International Master Gardener Conference going on. And one of the speakers today talked about landscaping for climatology, especially given the outbreak of fires. And he mentioned that one of the best fire prevention risks to undertake is to have a healthy lawn around your house. And I wish I had the notes, the exact words, but the point being that for as much as people might say that lawns don't do any good at all, having a 30 or 40 foot lawn from the house on out, not a bad thing. It could be a good fire break if we live in fire sensitive areas. So that brings me to the end. And as again, there was a lot to cover tonight, and there are certainly some aspects of lawn maintenance that should be followed up with. And I hope that you make use of that PDF outcome or PDF handout. And so with that, I'm open to any questions if anybody may have any.
Okay, I think we're going to go back to the group now for everybody. And is everyone there? Peter, are you putting us back with everyone?
Everyone's there. We've all been there listening.
Okay. So I have to go somewhere. Well, anyway, oh, there we are. Hi, everybody. I really want to Now I'm not even on myself. Okay. Well, whatever. I'm speaking. This is Winnie, and we're going to open up for questions now for Tony. And take it away. If people have questions, put your hand up and I'll call on you or whatever. Sounds like school, but are there questions out there?
So I'm looking at the chat and I see a question. Please comment on stiltgrass and how it might be controlled other than herbicides. That's a really good question. What you want to do, I wish I had a slide on stiltgrass so everybody knew what I was talking about, but it's an invasive grass that is prone to grow in shady areas, shady, moist areas. And gosh, it was one of those things that was introduced at around 1915 from I think China maybe. And it loves the environment here. So how do you get rid of it? Well, again, short of using glyphosate, what you'd want to do is otherwise cut it really, really short and rake up all of the debris and toss it. Now, you can also then, now this isn't an herbicide, well, maybe it's a weed prevent, maybe it is an herbicide, but if you didn't want to kill it, you would maybe use a preventer. But if you don't want to use a preventer, a chemical preventer, you could also consider using corn gluten. And corn gluten acts as a weed preventer, but it's all organic. Now, I will also tell you this: if you have an extent, if the stiltgrass is very heavy, it's going to take a couple seasons to get rid of because it deposits thousands and thousands of seeds and is just going to be there all the time. The other thing I guess you could do is, if knowing that it grows in a shady area, if there's any way to open up a tree canopy somehow, it gets, make it more inviting for regular grass, that would be a good thing too.
Other questions? I think Julie, you had your hand up. Julie, we can't hear you.
There we are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on mosquito sprays, and in your opinion, is this a damage to the environment, harming bees, butterflies, and insects? It's not entirely grass lawn related, but it is. How do you feel about it?
Well, stepping out of lawn business for a moment, I just happened to be listening to another lecture on the International Master Gardening Conference today. And the question was similar to the one that you asked, Julie. And so there are products, there are sprays that can be put on, but the person who was giving the briefing said that you also run the risk of doing damage to beneficial insects. So what do you do?
Yeah.
First of all, I think you want to prevent the larva from producing. And so what you can get mosquito dunks. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
They come in a packet. They look like little mini donuts. And if you have a bird bath with water, you would put one of those dunks in there. And they're environmentally safe, and they don't do any harm to birds or any other insects, but they prevent, they kill the larva of the mosquito. And so anywhere first of all, you want to empty as much standing water as you have, whether this be a rain gutter, whether it be an old bucket somewhere in the corner of your yard that you weren't aware is filling up with water, or an old wheelbarrow, bird bath. But you want to get rid of standing water. So that's first and foremost the main way of keeping the mosquitoes away. And as I said, the mosquito dunks, they're a good thing. I think you're safe in using them.
Great.
That's exactly what they're called. They're called dunks, DUNKS.
Tony,
Jerry?
if I might, one of the recommendations I've heard as far as using the BT dunks is get rid of all your surface water, like you said, but
Mhm.
put a 5-gallon bucket out. Throw some grass in it to make it nice and stinky to attract the
Yeah.
mosquitoes.
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks, throw a dunk in. So you not only kill them, but you attract them to one place that you got control over. You got to remember to put the dunks in.
Yeah, that makes sense. No, I'm with you on that. I mean, I've done that.
That is so much more.
I've done that tea business, you know.
So much more effective, I think, also
Yeah.
than coming in and spraying the whole neighborhood.
No, I'm not for that. You know.
Yes. I personally am against the mosquito spraying. I would not choose to use that in my yard. The neighbors use it in their yard. But I just wanted to have your thoughts on how harmful it can be to the environment. You know, the bees, butterflies, the insects, and everything else that grows in the lawn.
Well, the person that was talking today, I forget his name, but you know, he said in many cases it's overkill.
Right.
Put all this on for one little mosquito, and I'm not downplaying the criticality of mosquitoes, but I think prevention is the key. You know, get rid of those bodies of water, or as Jerry said, you know, direct them to a certain area and kill them there.
Winnie, Gary Pan had a chat question, and I noticed his hand is up. He asked a couple of questions about armyworms and testing pH, Tony.
Well, armyworms. Well, guess what? Am I still up?
Yep, you're on.
Okay, come on, take me to armyworm. So I anticipated that armyworms being in the news a lot would potentially be asked. So this is an armyworm, and for some reason there's been a large outbreak this year, and they can devastate a lawn in short time. And I think mostly it's a newly seeded, maybe not the healthiest turf, that's the newly seeded lawn or the weakest lawn that's going to be the most vulnerable. But just you see what the results are there, and there are similar pictures if you were to look at any of, you know, so many of the news articles today. Cooperative extension says use a drench test to determine, first of all, whether or not these are armyworms. And you basically do that, and I'm reading my own slide here, sorry. But a couple tablespoons of dishwashing liquid into a couple gallons of water, and then pour it on the lawn, and watch the area to see if any caterpillars come out of the ground. And if they do, then treatment is required. And of the products that our pest management guide from Virginia Tech and the Virginia Cooperative Extension have listed, the pesticides would contain the active ingredients that you see right here.
Tony, you are not screen sharing, so they can't see your stuff.
Oh, well, okay. Let me see what I can do.
One thing that I've heard is that commercial losses, they could be contagious from lawn based upon some of the, I don't know, caterpillars or whatever, moving from property to another. So
Gary, you're breaking up. Gary, you're breaking up. Could you repeat your question?
You can hear me, like I have some computer problems, but apparently worms can move onto lawn based upon the commercial service equipment, and that would be a concern, of course.
Tony?
Insects, diseases can pass from machinery to machinery. Am I screen sharing now? Or, I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, but to answer the question, that's another thing to ask your lawn service. You know, do you wash down your equipment from property to property? Because are you bringing me presents from another lawn service? And I'll tell you, just as much as there's concern about the Army webworm, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the spotted lanternfly. And unfortunately, I didn't have the presence of mind to do a slide on that. But in general, the spotted lanternfly is devastating to orchard crops, to vineyards and the like. And there's a large outbreak in South Central Pennsylvania. It's made its way to Virginia, Winchester. We've, I think, noticed they've been observed in Prince William County, so far not in Fairfax County. But I would say if you're conscientious enough, Google spotted lanternfly. The term fly is kind of a misnomer because they are the ultimate hitchhiker. They hitchhike onto whatever machinery or vehicles, and that's how they get there. There have been extensive newscasts about it in the last couple of days, both on, I've seen it on Good Morning America, I've seen it also on the local channels, and there's no kind way to get rid of them except to kill them when you see them. I wish I had an image and I would show it to you, but I unfortunately don't. But Google it, spotted lanternfly. So that's, I'm sorry, I hijacked the question for another, to advocate another something else. I saw a question also on the chat box about, I should mention the home turf program that that the Virginia Fairfax County Master Gardeners offer. And so very briefly, pre-pandemic, before we had to suspend the program, Fairfax County Master Gardeners would go out to a property, take soil samples, do everything we talked about in this briefing, send the soil samples in for testing, measure the size of your lawn. And when the soil samples come back, tell you how much lime, if any, you might need to apply, what kind of various fertilizers you could apply. And, you know, so that was a pretty comprehensive program. I know that we've tried to cobble together a virtual program this year, and thankfully there have been, you know, some success with that, but it certainly hasn't been the scale that it has in recent years. But if you go on our website, fcmga.org, Fairfax County Master Gardeners, and click on services and home turf, you could read more about it. And I'm hoping that by next year, we'll have reconstituted this program so that, you know, we'll match some of the amounts of visits that we had done in previous years. And I mean, we like well over 100 some visits that we'd send teams out on.
Tony, could you go back to the full screen for everybody, with everybody on it?
Yes, sorry.
That's okay.
Let's see.
I'm glad you promoted that program. It's a great program. We used it.
Oh, good.
Years ago. Yeah, years
okay.
ago.
Oh, good. I used to enjoy going out. I used to go out myself, and I had fun. I enjoyed it.
Great. Okay, any other questions?
So I see another one. Is there an easy way for homeowners to conduct their own pH test? Absolutely. I was remiss, and I should have said, you can actually go to your local library and ask for a soil test kit. And the soil test kit is simply a box in which you would collect soil and a form that you would fill out saying, this is my soil, and you send it into Virginia Tech, you'll fill out some specifics like what are you testing for, et cetera. And then, they'll give you the results back by email within about a week of your mailing. So the test itself is $10 for one test. And postage, when you wrap it up in another box, is about $7 these days. So it's definitely well worth it. You can also get these at certain, I know our county extension agent has populated them also with various garden centers, maybe not so near Great Falls, but definitely your library. And if there's also any farmers markets where we're providing advice, you can ask for a soil test kit there as well. Now you can buy devices that will test your soil too. However, since Virginia Tech has all this whiz-bang lab equipment, I'd spend the $10, get something from them, just so you know that it's the right thing.
Okay. Anything else?
Okay, be sure I'm looking. Okay, thank you for your comment there, Roseanne. Ask your lawn service what kind of herbicide they're using. Definitely. Is it useful to have aeration even if I don't add seed or new dirt afterwards? Yeah, it is, because what you're doing is opening up the soil to allow better penetration of oxygen and water, and that's just going to prevent, it's going to prevent compaction, and it's going to allow the root expansion overall. Again, I'm a big fan of doing it in the fall. It's been said, and I don't know if this is true or not, but when you do it in the spring, you're probably opening up new weed seeds too. You're bringing them to the surface, but I don't know if there's anything to that at all. But I mean, whenever you do it, it's a good thing to do for sure. Anything else at all?
Okay, with that, I think everybody needs to get a good night's sleep so that they can start working their lawns tomorrow.
Yeah, very well. I'm sorry for going overtime. But
No, absolutely not.
I
also
really
like
thought
to
I
say
had
a
a
couple of
time.
other things. Starting tomorrow, there will be these native plant clinics over there at the Freedom Memorial at 11 o'clock in the morning. They're free. And if you want to consider some alternatives to your yard, maybe enhancing your native plant garden, you might consider that. They start tomorrow on Tuesdays at 11 o'clock in the morning. And then in October, we will have a big dark sky program over at the observatory. That'll be at 7 o'clock in the evening. Hopefully it'll be a beautiful evening and we'll be able to see stars and planets and whatever. So that's what's coming up. So I really appreciate everybody showing up today. And for Tony, thank you so much for putting all this work into this. I really appreciate it a lot, and I'm glad Roseanne could join you. And I didn't know if Candy, another Fairfax County Master Gardener, had anything she wanted to share in addition to all this, but she's on mute. I don't know if she hears me or not.
I hear you, Winnie. No, Tony, it was a great presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
But let's put it this way. The master gardeners are well trained. They know their stuff.
All right. I knew you. If I brought Candy in, we would get a good closing. All right. Well, thank you everybody for your time and effort, and for Peter for keeping us all technically engaged here. So thanks a lot.
And if I can add one thing, Tony mentioned several times the resource documents that he prepared, and those are located on the www.gfca.org on the GFCA's website. If you scroll down, there's a link, just click on that, and there are several pages of hyperlinks to all kinds of good information that you mentioned tonight, just for future use. Thanks very much.
Yes, that's true. And and our follow-up email to remind you all to join us tonight, that is included at the bottom of that email. So, but it's always nice to go to our newsletter and our website. So I'm not, do that too. All righty. Thank you all very much and have a lovely evening and be ready for getting out there tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Everybody, bye now. Thank you.